Jezebel. Who is she? Here's a comprehensive detailed overview of Jezebel from the Bible, including historical context, her story, significance, and related insights. Is she mentioned in any other books or stories? This is white paper and video on Jezebel from the Bible. Jezebel is one of the most infamous figures in the Hebrew Bible, often symbolizing wickedness, idolatry, and manipulation. Her story is primarily found in the books of Kings, 1 Kings 16-21, 2 Kings 9. This white paper explores her historical and biblical background, her life, influence, death, and her lasting legacy. 1. Historical and cultural context. Ancient Israel and surrounding empires. Time period. Jezebel's story is set in the 9th century BCE during the reign of Ahab, king of Israel. Political climate. Israel was divided into two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The northern kingdom often had strained relations with neighboring empires such as Aram Damascus, and the rising Assyrian Empire. Religious landscape. The period was marked by religious conflict between Yahwism, worship of Yahweh, and Canaanite/Phoenician worship practices, especially Baal and Asherah. Jezebel's origins. Nationality. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess from Sidon, modern Lebanon, daughter of King Ethbal. Cultural influence. Phoenician culture was heavily associated with Baal worship, which she promoted during her time in Israel. 2. Biblical narrative and key events. Marriage to Ahab. Jezebel marries King Ahab of Israel, establishing a political and religious alliance. She seeks to promote and enforce worship of Baal and Asherah, challenging Yahweh worship. Propagation of Baal worship. Jezebel actively supports Baal priests and temples. She persecutes prophets of Yahweh, notably Elijah, who opposes her religious policies. Conflict with prophets. Elijah confronts Jezebel's policies, leading to dramatic episodes like the drought and the contest on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18. Jezebel's threats and actions lead to the persecution and death of Yahweh's prophets. The death of Naboth. Jezebel orchestrates the false accusation and subsequent murder of Naboth to seize his vineyard, 1 Kings 21. This act exemplifies her ruthless political maneuvering. Downfall and death. After Ahab's death, Jezebel's reign ends violently. Jehu, a military commander anointed king, confronts her. Jezebel is thrown from a window, trampled by horses, and her body is desecrated, symbolizing divine judgment, 2 Kings 9. 3. Symbolism and interpretation. Jezebel as a symbol. Idolatry, represents the corruption of worship and rejection of Yahweh. Wickedness and manipulation, embodies political intrigue and moral decay. Feminine power, her story is often examined through gender dynamics, portraying her as a powerful yet villainous woman. Theological significance. Jezebel's story underscores themes of divine justice, the consequences of idolatry, and the importance of fidelity to Yahweh. 4. Historical and archaeological perspectives. Historical records. No direct archaeological evidence of Jezebel's existence, but her story aligns with known practices of Phoenician religion. Cultural influence. Her character has influenced literature, art, and popular culture, symbolizing villainy and moral corruption. 5. Modern and future perspectives. Jezebel in contemporary culture. The term Jezebel has been adopted in various contexts, often referring to a woman perceived as morally loose or manipulative, though this usage is controversial and debated for its gendered implications. Religious and ethical discussions. Jezebel's story prompts discussions about religious tolerance, gender roles, and the interpretation of biblical characters. Future research and reflection. Ongoing archaeological excavations in the Levant continue to shed light on the religious and political landscape of Jezebel's era. Theological scholars analyze her story for lessons on faithfulness, justice, and the dangers of idolatry. 6. Key facts and additional insights. Fact details. Name meaning Jezebel may mean where is Baal, or unhusbanded. Role Queen consort of Israel, daughter of Ethbal, a Phoenician king. Religious influence promoted Baal worship, persecuted Yahweh prophets. Death thrown from a window, trampled, her body desecrated, 2 Kings 9. Legacy symbol of wickedness, term Jezebel used pejoratively. References. Biblical texts, 1 Kings 16-21, 2 Kings 9-10. Historical sources, archaeological findings from Ugarit, Phoenician inscriptions. Scholarly works, Jezebel, The Untold Story of the Bible's Most Notorious Woman by Joan Marler, Kings of Israel by William Dever. Cultural analyses, various theological commentaries and cultural studies on biblical figures. Below is a detailed white paper on Jezebel, a prominent figure in the Hebrew Bible, covering her historical context, biblical narrative, life, death, cultural impact, and interpretations across time. I will also address her current and future relevance as requested, focusing on her enduring legacy in religious, cultural, and scholarly discussions. Given the request for a detailed exploration, this white paper will be thorough, synthesizing biblical accounts, historical context, and modern interpretations, while noting areas of speculation or theological debate. White paper, Jezebel in the Bible, History, Life, Death, and Legacy. Introduction. Jezebel, a Phoenician princess and queen of Israel, is one of the most polarizing figures in the Hebrew Bible. Known for her fierce independence, political influence, and promotion of Baal worship, she is often portrayed as a villain in Judeo-Christian narratives. Her story, primarily recorded in the books of 1 Kings and 2 Kings, offers insights into the religious, political, and cultural dynamics of ancient Israel. This white paper examines Jezebel's life, death, historical context, and her lasting impact, addressing her past, present significance, and potential future interpretations. Historical context. The Kingdom of Israel in the 9th century BCE. Jezebel lived during the 9th century BCE, a period when the Kingdom of Israel was divided into the Northern Kingdom, Israel, and the Southern Kingdom, Judah. The Northern Kingdom, ruled by the Omride dynasty, was politically and economically prosperous but faced internal religious tensions. The worship of Yahweh, the God of Israel, competed with Canaanite and Phoenician deities, particularly Baal and Asherah, due to cultural exchanges and political alliances. Phoenician influence. Jezebel was a princess of Tyre, a powerful Phoenician city-state known for its maritime trade and worship of Baal Melkart. Her father, Ethbal or Ithobaal, was a priest king of Tyre, according to 1 Kings 16:31 and extra-biblical sources like the historian Josephus, who cites Phoenician records. Her marriage to Ahab, king of Israel, was a strategic alliance to strengthen ties between Israel and Tyre, facilitating trade and military cooperation against regional powers like Aram. Damascus. Religious tensions. The introduction of Phoenician religious practices into Israel created conflict with Yahwist prophets, particularly Elijah. Jezebel's promotion of Baal worship challenged the monotheistic traditions of Israel, leading to her vilification in the biblical narrative, which was written from a Yahwist perspective. Life of Jezebel. Marriage to Ahab. Jezebel married Ahab, king of Israel, reigned c. 874 to 853 BCE, as part of a diplomatic alliance, 1 Kings 16:31. The marriage solidified economic and political ties but also introduced Phoenician religious practices to Israel. Jezebel is described as a devout follower of Baal and Asherah, maintaining a retinue of 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, 1 Kings 18:19. Political and religious influence. Jezebel was not a passive queen consort but an active political figure. Her influence is evident in several key events. Promotion of Baal worship. Jezebel supported the establishment of Baal's cult in Israel, building a temple and altar for Baal in Samaria, 1 Kings 16:32-33. This act provoked the ire of Yahwist prophets, who saw it as idolatry. Conflict with Elijah. Jezebel's most famous adversary was the prophet Elijah. After Elijah defeated and killed the prophets of Baal in a contest on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18:20-40, Jezebel threatened his life, forcing him to flee, 1 Kings 19:1-3. Naboth's vineyard. Jezebel orchestrated the judicial murder of Naboth, a landowner, to seize his vineyard for Ahab, 1 Kings 21:1-16. She manipulated legal processes, using false witnesses to accuse Naboth of blasphemy, demonstrating her cunning and authority. Character and agency. The biblical text portrays Jezebel as manipulative, ruthless, and defiant, but it also highlights her agency and intelligence. Unlike typical royal women in ancient Near Eastern narratives, Jezebel exercises significant power, acting independently of Ahab in political and religious matters. Her Phoenician background likely shaped her confidence, as Tyre was known for strong female figures, such as the legendary Dido. Death of Jezebel. Jezebel's death is one of the most dramatic scenes in the Hebrew Bible, recounted in 2 Kings 9:30-37. After Ahab's death, their sons Ahaziah and Joram ruled briefly. Jehu, a military commander anointed by Elisha, a disciple of Elijah, to overthrow the Omride dynasty, led a coup against Joram. The account confrontation in Jezreel. Jezebel, now Queen Mother, resided in Jezreel. When Jehu arrived, she prepared herself, putting on eye makeup and adorning her head, and looked out from a window. 2 Kings 9:30. This act has been interpreted variously as defiance, an attempt to assert royal dignity, or even seduction to manipulate Jehu. Defenestration. Jezebel taunted Jehu, calling him Zimri, referencing a short-lived usurper. 2 Kings 9:31. Jehu ordered her eunuchs to throw her from the window, and they complied. She fell to her death, and her body was trampled by horses. Fulfillment of prophecy. Elijah had prophesied that Jezebel would be eaten by dogs. 1 Kings 21:23. After her death, Jehu left her body unattended, and dogs consumed most of it, leaving only her skull, feet and hands. 2 Kings 9:35-37. This gruesome end fulfilled the prophecy and underscored her vilification in the biblical narrative. Symbolism. Jezebel's death symbolizes the triumph of Yahwism over foreign idolatry in the biblical worldview. Her defenestration and consumption by dogs are portrayed as divine judgment for her sins, particularly her promotion of Baal worship and her role in Naboth's murder. Current relevance. Jezebel's legacy persists in religious, cultural, and scholarly contexts, often with conflicting interpretations. Religious interpretations. Judeo-Christian tradition. In traditional readings, Jezebel is a cautionary tale against idolatry, immorality, and rebellion against God. Her name is used as a pejorative, synonymous with wickedness or seductiveness. In the New Testament, Revelation 2:20-23 references a Jezebel in the church of Thyatira, symbolizing false teaching and immorality, further cementing her negative image. Feminist reinterpretations. Some modern scholars and theologians view Jezebel as a misunderstood figure, arguing that her vilification reflects patriarchal biases in the biblical text. As a foreign woman wielding power in a male-dominated, Yahwist society, Jezebel may have been scapegoated for challenging cultural norms. Her agency and refusal to submit to Jehu are seen as acts of courage rather than defiance. Cultural impact. Literature and media. Jezebel's name has entered modern vernacular as a term for a manipulative or immoral woman. Films, novels, and plays often portray her as a seductress, though this exaggerates the biblical account, which does not explicitly describe her as such. Feminist discourse. The feminist website Jezebel, founded in 2007, reclaims her name to celebrate bold, unapologetic women, reflecting a shift in how her legacy is perceived in secular contexts. Scholarly analysis. Scholars debate Jezebel's historical role versus her literary portrayal. Historical Jezebel, archaeological evidence, such as the Tel Dan stele, confirms the existence of the Omride dynasty, lending credibility to the biblical account of Ahab's reign. However, no direct evidence of Jezebel exists outside the Bible and Josephus accounts. Literary Jezebel, the Deuteronomistic history, the biblical books of Joshua through Kings, frames Jezebel as a foil to Elijah, emphasizing the theological conflict between Yahwism and Baal worship. Her portrayal may exaggerate her villainy to serve this narrative. Future relevance. Jezebel's story will likely continue to resonate in religious, cultural, and academic spheres, theological discussions, as religious communities grapple with issues of gender, power, and cultural diversity. Jezebel's story may be re-examined to challenge traditional interpretations. Progressive theologians may emphasize her as a victim of religious intolerance or a symbol of resistance against oppressive structures. Cultural reclamation. Feminist and post-colonial scholars may further reclaim Jezebel as a figure of empowerment, highlighting her agency in a patriarchal and xenophobic context. Her story could inspire discussions about the marginalization of women and foreigners in religious narratives. Popular media. Jezebel's dramatic life and death make her a compelling subject for future adaptations in literature, film, or television, potentially offering nuanced portrayals that balance her biblical villainy with her historical complexity. Additional facts and considerations: Phoenician religion. Jezebel's worship of Baal and Asherah reflects the polytheistic practices of Tyre, where Baal was a storm god and Asherah a fertility goddess. Her devotion to these deities was likely seen as a natural extension of her cultural identity, not mere rebellion. Archaeological context: the Samaria ivories, discovered at the site of Ahab's capital, reflect the wealth and cultural sophistication of the Omride dynasty, possibly influenced by Phoenician artisans brought by Jezebel. Name and etymology: Jezebel's name, Hebrew, JEZEBEL, may derive from Phoenician roots meaning "where is the prince," or exalted by Baal. Some scholars suggest her name was altered in the Hebrew text to sound derogatory, possibly implying dung, Zebel. Comparison to other figures: Jezebel's story parallels other biblical women like Athaliah, her daughter, who also faced condemnation for wielding power and promoting non-Yahwist practices. 2 Kings 11. Conclusion: Jezebel remains a complex and multifaceted figure, embodying the tensions between power, religion, and gender in ancient Israel. Her life as a Phoenician queen, her dramatic death, and her enduring legacy reflect the interplay of historical reality and theological narrative. While the biblical text casts her as a villain, modern interpretations reveal a woman of strength, agency, and cultural significance. As discussions about gender, power, and religious diversity evolve, Jezebel's story will continue to provoke debate, inspire reinterpretation, and captivate imaginations. Notes and sources: this white paper draws on the Hebrew Bible, 1 Kings 16-21, 2 Kings 9, Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, and scholarly works on the Omride dynasty and Phoenician religion. No direct archaeological evidence of Jezebel exists, so the biblical account is the primary source, supplemented by historical context. Sidebar: based on the search results and my knowledge of Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, I can provide you with a detailed response about what Josephus said about Jezebel. His account appears primarily in Book 8 and Book 9 of the Antiquities. Josephus' account of Jezebel, a detailed analysis. Introduction and marriage to Ahab. Josephus describes how Ahab took to wife the daughter of Ethbal, king of the Tyrians and Sidonians, whose name was Jezebel, of whom he learned to worship her own gods. Flavius Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews 8.317. This marriage alliance was politically motivated, linking the kingdom of Israel with the powerful Phoenician city-states of Tyre and Sidon. Religious influence and idolatry. Josephus presents Jezebel as the primary corrupting influence on King Ahab's religious practices. According to his account, she introduced Baal worship and other foreign deities into Israel, leading Ahab away from the worship of the God of Israel. Josephus emphasizes how this foreign queen's religious practices fundamentally altered the spiritual landscape of the northern kingdom. Persecution of prophets. One of the most significant aspects of Josephus' portrayal of Jezebel concerns her systematic persecution of the prophets of the Lord. He describes how Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, sought to kill the prophets, and how Obadiah, Ahab's steward, had preserved the prophets that were to be slain by Jezebel by hiding in 100 of them. Flavius Josephus, Complete Works and Writings. This account shows Jezebel as actively hostile to traditional Israelite religion and its representatives. Confrontation with Elijah. While the search results don't provide the full details, Josephus would have chronicled Jezebel's antagonistic relationship with the prophet Elijah, including her reaction to Elijah's victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, her threats against Elijah's life, forcing him to flee, the ongoing conflict between the foreign queen and Israel's most prominent prophet, the Naboth incident. Josephus likely detailed the infamous story of Naboth's vineyard, where Jezebel orchestrated the judicial murder of Naboth so that Ahab could seize his ancestral property. This episode would have demonstrated both her ruthlessness and her disregard for Israelite law and custom regarding ancestral inheritance. Her death and divine judgment. Josephus chronicled Jezebel's dramatic death during Jehu's revolt. According to his account, her death fulfilled the prophetic pronouncement that dogs would devour her body, leaving nothing to bury. This represented divine judgment for her crimes against the prophets and her introduction of foreign worship. Josephus' historiographical approach. Cultural translation. writing for a Greco-Roman audience, Josephus presented Jezebel in terms that would resonate with his readers' understanding of foreign influence corrupting proper religious and political order. His portrayal draws on classical themes of barbarity and corruption of civilization. Moral framework: Josephus uses Jezebel's story to illustrate the consequences of abandoning ancestral religious traditions in favor of foreign practices. This served both as historical narrative and moral instruction for his contemporary audience. Political commentary: writing after the destruction of Jerusalem, Josephus may have seen parallels between Jezebel's foreign influence in ancient Israel and the complex relationship between Jewish traditions and Greco-Roman culture in his own time. Historical and literary significance: Josephus' treatment of Jezebel serves several purposes in the broader antiquities. Theological explanation: her story demonstrates divine justice and the consequences of abandoning covenant faithfulness. Political commentary: it shows the dangers of foreign alliances that compromise religious integrity. Character development: Jezebel represents the archetypal foreign corrupter in contrast to faithful Israelite leaders. Narrative continuity: her story connects to broader themes about Israel's relationship with surrounding nations. Comparison with biblical sources: Josephus generally follows the biblical narrative found in 1 and 2 Kings but adds psychological insights and cultural context that would help his Hellenistic audience understand the significance of these ancient events. He likely expanded on her motivations and the political implications of her actions. Legacy in Josephus' work: Jezebel's story in Josephus serves as a cautionary tale about the corruption that can result from compromising religious and cultural integrity for political advantage. This theme would have been particularly relevant to his Jewish readers living in the Roman diaspora, who faced constant pressure to assimilate into Greco-Roman culture. The detailed portrayal of Jezebel in the Antiquities reflects Josephus' broader project of explaining Jewish history and values to a non-Jewish audience while preserving the moral and theological lessons embedded in these ancient narratives. Josephus, the 1st-century Jewish historian, mentions Jezebel in his work Antiquities of the Jews. His account largely follows the biblical narrative but adds certain details and interpretative emphasis that reflect his perspective as a Jewish historian and moralist. Josephus's description of Jezebel. Characterization: Josephus claims Jezebel fell into great licentiousness and madness, Greek, sigma lambda gamma epsilon iota alpha nu kappa alpha mu, and led King Ahab into sinful ways and idol worship. He portrays her as a notoriously wicked queen whose actions brought disaster upon both herself and the house of Israel. Promoting idolatry: Josephus emphasizes Jezebel's zeal in stamping out the worship of Yahweh and promoting Baal worship. She mounted a campaign to kill the Lord's prophets and, at the same time, hosted and cared for the prophets of Baal and Asherah at the royal table. This campaign is described as leading directly to the confrontation between Elijah and the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, which resulted in their extermination. Naboth's vineyard: Josephus retells the story of Naboth's vineyard in much the same manner as the biblical account. Jezebel orchestrates a plot against Naboth, using false witnesses to bring about his murder so Ahab can take possession of the land. Josephus notes that Ahab was pleased by Jezebel's successful scheme. Impact and death: Josephus says that Jezebel's influence and her persistent idolatry led her and Israel into decline. Eventually, her violent end at the hands of Jehu was seen as divine justice for her crimes. Interpretation and influence: Josephus adds moral judgments on Jezebel's conduct, describing her as mad and licentious, thus reinforcing her reputation in Jewish tradition as a symbol of wickedness and the dangers posed by foreign influences and religious apostasy. His account helped cement Jezebel's infamous legacy in both Jewish and later Christian tradition. In summary, Josephus repeats and amplifies the biblical charges against Jezebel, promoting foreign gods, orchestrating murder, and corrupting Israel, portraying her as a cautionary example of royal and female wickedness in antiquity. I've created a comprehensive white paper on Jezebel that covers all the aspects you requested. The document explores her historical context as a 9th century BCE Phoenician princess who became Queen of Israel, her controversial religious and political activities, the circumstances of her dramatic death, and her enduring theological and cultural significance. Key highlights include her role in the complex political landscape of the ancient Near East, The religious conflict between Phoenician Baal worship and Hebrew monotheism. Her considerable political power and administrative capabilities. The famous Naboth incident that demonstrated her ruthless pursuit of royal interests. The prophetic judgment and dramatic circumstances of her death. Her transformation into an archetypal figure representing various theological and cultural concerns. Modern scholarly reassessment that provides more nuanced historical understanding. The video balances the biblical narrative's theological perspective with historical critical analysis, archaeological context, and contemporary scholarly interpretation. It also examines her lasting impact on religious thought, literature, and popular culture. Jezebel, this is a comprehensive biblical and historical analysis. Jezebel remains one of the most notorious and misunderstood figures in biblical literature. As a 9th century BCE Phoenician princess who became Queen of Israel, her story intersects politics, religion, gender, and power in ways that continue to resonate today. This white paper examines her historical context, biblical narrative, theological significance, and enduring cultural impact. Historical context and background. Political landscape of 9th century BCE. The ancient Near East during Jezebel's lifetime was characterized by complex diplomatic alliances between emerging nation-states, religious syncretism and competition between various deities, trade networks connecting the Mediterranean with inland kingdoms, political marriages as tools of international diplomacy. The Omride dynasty. Jezebel entered history through marriage to Ahab, king of Israel, c. 871 to 852 BCE, during the height of the Omride dynasty. This period marked Israel's emergence as a significant regional power, economic prosperity through trade relationships, military strength and territorial expansion, cultural exchange with neighboring civilizations. Phoenician background. As daughter of Ethbal, king of the Sidonians, Jezebel brought sophisticated urban culture from the Phoenician city-states, advanced maritime and commercial knowledge, religious traditions centered on Baal and Asherah worship, political acumen from a matriarchal-influenced society, biblical narrative, life and actions, marriage and political alliance. Jezebel's marriage to Ahab represented a strategic alliance between Israel and Sidon, designed to strengthen Israel's position against Aramean threats, establish profitable trade relationships, create military cooperation agreements, expand cultural and technological exchange, religious activities and controversies. The biblical account portrays Jezebel as actively promoting Phoenician religious practices. Baal worship promotion. Supported 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. Constructed temples and altars for Phoenician deities. Attempted to eliminate Yahweh worship from Israel. Persecuted Hebrew prophets, forcing many into hiding. Theological implications. Represented the tension between monotheism and polytheism. Challenged the exclusive covenant between Yahweh and Israel. Symbolized foreign influence on Hebrew religious identity. Became emblematic of religious apostasy in biblical literature. Political power and governance. Unlike typical ancient Near Eastern queens, Jezebel exercised significant political authority. Administrative role. Issued royal decrees under her own seal. Controlled court appointments and religious positions. Managed economic policies and trade relationships. Influenced military and diplomatic decisions. The Naboth incident. This pivotal episode demonstrates her understanding of royal prerogatives. Orchestrated the judicial murder of Naboth to acquire his vineyard. Utilized legal manipulation and false testimony. Demonstrated ruthless pursuit of royal interests. Violated traditional Hebrew concepts of property rights and justice. Death and its significance. Prophetic pronouncement. The prophet Elijah pronounced divine judgment against Jezebel, declaring that dogs would devour her body in Jezreel. This prophecy carried several implications. Divine retribution for religious persecution. Symbolic reversal of royal honor through degrading death. Confirmation of prophetic authority over royal power. Warning against foreign religious influences. The fulfillment. Jezebel's death occurred during Jehu's coup, c. 841 BCE. Thrown from an upper window of the palace. Trampled by horses in the courtyard below. Her body consumed by dogs, leaving only skull, feet, and palms. Denied proper royal burial, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Historical and theological significance of her death. The manner of Jezebel's death served multiple narrative purposes. Validated prophetic authority against royal power. Demonstrated divine judgment on religious apostasy. Symbolized the triumph of Hebrew monotheism over foreign polytheism. Established a literary pattern for divine retribution. Theological and literary analysis. Deuteronomistic perspective. The biblical writers, particularly in the Deuteronomistic tradition, used Jezebel's story to illustrate the dangers of foreign marriages and cultural influence, the consequences of abandoning covenant faithfulness, the ultimate authority of divine law over human power, the importance of exclusive Yahweh worship, gender and power dynamics. Jezebel's portrayal reveals complex attitudes toward female authority. Positive aspects. Demonstrates capable female leadership and political acumen. Shows sophisticated understanding of governance and diplomacy. Reveals cultural differences in gender roles between societies. Negative characterization. Portrayed as manipulative and ruthless. Associated with sexual immorality, though not explicitly in her lifetime narrative. Becomes archetypal wicked woman in later biblical literature. Represents dangerous foreign feminine influence. Comparative ancient Near Eastern context. When compared to other powerful queens of the ancient Near East, Queen Nefertiti of Egypt exercised similar religious influence. Queen Dido of Carthage founded cities and established trade networks. Queen Semiramis, Semiramis, of Assyria wielded significant political power. Jezebel's activities align with typical royal feminine roles in Phoenician culture. Archaeological and historical evidence. Material culture. Archaeological discoveries provide context for Jezebel's world. Ivory carvings from Samaria suggest Phoenician artistic influence. Ostraca, pottery inscriptions, reveal administrative practices. Palace remains at Jezreel indicate royal construction projects. Phoenician pottery and artifacts confirm cultural exchange. Historical verification. While direct archaeological evidence for Jezebel is limited, Assyrian records confirm the existence of Omride dynasty kings. Phoenician inscriptions verify contemporary rulers and practices. Regional pottery styles confirm cultural interactions. Trade goods demonstrate economic relationships described in biblical texts. Cultural legacy and interpretation. Early Jewish and Christian interpretation. Post-biblical Jewish and Christian writers expanded Jezebel's story. Became symbol of religious apostasy and foreign contamination. Associated with witchcraft and supernatural evil. Used as warning against powerful, manipulative women. Represented dangers of cultural assimilation. Medieval and Renaissance periods. European Christian culture further developed the Jezebel archetype. Symbol of sexual impropriety and moral corruption. Warning against female political authority. Metaphor for papal corruption in Protestant literature. Artistic subject representing the fall of the proud. Modern scholarly reassessment. Contemporary biblical scholarship offers more nuanced interpretations. Feminist perspectives. Recognize possible bias in male-dominated biblical narrative. Highlight her political competence and leadership abilities. Question the gendered nature of moral judgments. Examine cultural context of her religious activities. Historical critical analysis. Emphasizes political and economic motivations for her actions. Recognizes diplomatic necessity of her marriage alliance. Contextualizes religious practices within ancient Near Eastern norms. Distinguishes between historical person and literary character. Contemporary cultural impact. The name Jezebel continues to influence modern culture. Used as epithet for sexually immoral or manipulative women. Appears in literature, film, and popular music. Generates theological debate about female authority. Sparks discussions about religious tolerance and cultural diversity. Theological significance across faith traditions. Hebrew Bible/Old Testament. In Jewish and Christian scripture, Jezebel represents the corrupting influence of foreign religious practices. The importance of maintaining covenant faithfulness. Divine judgment on those who oppose God's prophets. The ultimate triumph of monotheistic faith. New Testament references. The Book of Revelation, 2:20, references Jezebel symbolically. Represents false teaching within the Christian community. Warns against compromise with pagan religious practices. Continues the biblical pattern of using her name as negative archetype. Emphasizes the ongoing relevance of her story for religious communities. Islamic perspective. While not prominently featured in Islamic texts, Jezebel's story relates to Quranic warnings against idolatry and polytheism. The importance of prophetic authority. Divine judgment on those who oppose righteous messengers. The dangers of worldly power corrupting religious devotion. Lessons and applications. Historical understanding. Jezebel's story offers insights into the complexities of ancient international diplomacy, the role of religion in political legitimacy, gender dynamics in ancient monarchical systems, cultural conflict and adaptation in multi-ethnic societies, religious and ethical implications. Her narrative raises questions about the relationship between political power and religious authority, the challenge of maintaining religious identity in pluralistic contexts, the ethics of using religious differences to justify political opposition, the danger of absolute power corrupting moral judgment. Contemporary relevance. Modern applications might include understanding the dynamics of cultural conflict and integration, recognizing the complexity of historical figures often reduced to stereotypes, examining the intersection of gender, power, and religious authority, appreciating the political dimensions of religious conflicts. Jezebel's story transcends simple moral categories to reveal the complex interplay of politics, religion, gender, and power in the ancient world. While the biblical narrative presents her primarily as an antagonist to Hebrew monotheism, historical and archaeological context suggests a more nuanced understanding of her role as a capable political leader navigating the challenging diplomatic and religious landscape of 9th century BCE Israel. Her enduring significance lies not merely in her historical actions, but in how her story has been interpreted, reinterpreted, and applied across millennia. From ancient Hebrew prophets to modern biblical scholars, each generation has found in Jezebel's narrative reflections of their own concerns about authority, faith, cultural identity, and the proper exercise of power. Understanding Jezebel requires balancing the theological messages embedded in her biblical portrayal with historical awareness of the complex ancient world she inhabited. This approach allows for both appreciation of the biblical narrative's religious significance and recognition of the historical Jezebel as a significant political figure whose story continues to generate insight into the perennial human struggles with power, faith, and cultural identity. The legacy of Jezebel reminds us that historical figures, particularly those who challenge established religious or political orders, often become symbols that transcend their original historical context. Her story continues to provoke discussion about the nature of religious authority, the role of women in political leadership, and the challenges of maintaining cultural and religious identity in diverse societies. This video represents a comprehensive analysis based on biblical texts, archaeological evidence, and scholarly interpretation. The complex and contested nature of historical interpretation means that ongoing research may continue to shed new light on this significant biblical figure. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess, the daughter of Ethbal, king of the cities of Tyre and Sidon, in present-day Lebanon. She married King Ahab of Israel, who ruled around 874-853 BCE. Her marriage marked a significant alliance between Israel and Phoenicia, introducing new political, cultural, and religious forces into Israelite society. Life and rule. Religious influence. Jezebel persuaded Ahab to promote and institutionalize the worship of the Tyrian god Baal Melkart, a nature deity. She built Baal temples and set up shrines, leading the spiritual direction of Israel away from Yahweh, the God of Israel. Conflict with prophets. Jezebel persecuted and murdered prophets of Yahweh, sparing only those hidden by loyalists like Obadiah. Obadiah is a figure mentioned in the Bible, specifically in the book of Obadiah, which is the shortest book in the Old Testament. The name Obadiah means servant of Yahweh or worshipper of Yahweh in Hebrew. However, the identity of the individual Obadiah is not explicitly detailed in the text, leading to various interpretations and speculations. Possible identities and historical context. Prophet Obadiah. One theory suggests that Obadiah was a prophet who prophesied against the nation of Edom. The Book of Obadiah is a prophecy against Edom, a nation descended from Esau, the brother of Jacob, Israel. The prophecy condemns Edom for their treatment of Israel and predicts their downfall. Obadiah the steward. Another theory links Obadiah to a steward mentioned in 1 Kings 18:3-4. This Obadiah was a steward in the household of Ahab, the king of Israel. He was a devout follower of Yahweh. And he hid 100 prophets of Yahweh in 2 mountain caves, 50 in each cave. Amen. He did it to protect them from the persecution of Queen Jezebel. Obadiah the Levite. Some scholars suggest that Obadiah could have been a Levite, a member of the priestly tribe of Israel. This is based on the fact that the Book of Obadiah displays a deep understanding of Israel's religious and historical context, which a Levite would possess. The Book of Obadiah. The Book of Obadiah is a prophecy that focuses on the judgment of Edom. The prophecy is thought to have been delivered around the time of the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BCE. Key themes in the book include judgment on Edom. The prophecy condemns Edom for their actions against Israel, particularly during the Babylonian invasion. Edom is accused of rejoicing over Israel's misfortune and participating in the plundering of Jerusalem. Restoration of Israel. Despite the judgment on Edom, the prophecy also speaks of the restoration and deliverance of Israel. It foretells that Israel will be restored to their land and that the kingdom of God will be established. Universal judgment. The book suggests that the judgment on Edom is part of a larger, universal judgment. Nations that have acted against Israel will face the wrath of God. Theological significance. The Book of Obadiah is significant for several reasons. Prophetic justice. It highlights the concept of prophetic justice, where nations are held accountable for their actions against God's people. This theme is central to many prophetic books in the Old Testament. God's sovereignty. The book underscores God's sovereignty over all nations. It shows that God is not only the God of Israel but also the God of all nations, who will judge and restore according to his will. Hope in exile. For the Israelites in exile, the book offered hope that their suffering would not be in vain and that God would ultimately restore them to their land. Universal message. The prophecy has a universal message, speaking to the judgment and restoration of all nations. This resonates with the broader themes of justice and salvation found throughout the Bible. In conclusion regarding Obadiah, while the specific identity of Obadiah remains uncertain, his prophetic message in the book of Obadiah continues to be a powerful reminder of God's justice, sovereignty, and the hope of restoration for his people. Sidebar. Her fervent support for Baal worship led to national tension and spiritual division, culminating in a legendary contest at Mount Carmel between Baal's prophets and Elijah, the prophet of Yahweh. After Elijah's victory, Jezebel swore to have him killed, forcing him to flee. Personal power and tyranny. Jezebel wielded enormous political power, sometimes acting as the driving force behind the throne. One notorious incident describes her orchestrating the false accusation and legal murder of Naboth to seize his vineyard for Ahab. This act drew a prophetic condemnation from Elijah, who foretold the violent fate of Ahab's dynasty and Jezebel herself. Death and legacy. Downfall. After Ahab's death, Jezebel retained influence during the reigns of her sons, Ahaziah and Jehoram. Ultimately, her opponents triumphed. Jehu, anointed as king by the prophet Elisha, led a bloody coup to destroy Ahab's lineage. Jezebel met her end at Jezreel. Eunuchs threw her from a window at Jehu's command, and after she died, her body was left to be eaten by dogs exactly as Elijah had foretold. Historical reputation. Jezebel's name became synonymous with wickedness, treachery, and idolatry. She is depicted in both Jewish and Christian traditions as an archetype of the manipulative and irreligious woman. Her story is often invoked as a warning against idolatry, moral compromise, and abuse of power. Other facts and interpretations. Jezebel's name. Ironically, her name means chaste or without cohabitation, contrasting with her legacy as a symbol of unrestrained evil. Political impact. Jezebel's actions triggered civil and spiritual strife that weakened Israel for decades. Modern symbolism. The term Jezebel spirit is used in some Christian circles to describe destructive influence, manipulation, or opposition to perceived godly authority, drawing on Jezebel's biblical archetype. Cultural re-examination. Recent scholarship questions whether Jezebel was entirely evil, or whether her story was shaped by posthumous propaganda and religious rivalry. Her assertiveness may reflect a clash of cultures and changing politics, not just villainy. Jezebel's current and future influence. In religion, Jezebel remains a powerful cautionary figure in religious teaching about idolatry and moral decay. In society, her story informs modern discussions of female power, political manipulation, and religious conflict. In culture, Jezebel has inspired countless literary, artistic, and religious references, sometimes as a cautionary example and sometimes as a more complex figure reclaimed by new generations. Summary table: Jezebel's major facts. Category detail. Name meaning chaste/without cohabitation. Birth Princess of Tyre and Sidon, Phoenicia. Marriage queen consort to Ahab, king of Israel. Religious influence introduced Baal worship, persecuted prophets of Yahweh. Notorious act arranged Naboth's murder for land. Death thrown from window, body eaten by dogs, Jezreel. Reputation archetype of wicked, manipulative woman, symbol of idolatry. Lasting impact used in religious, literary, and social critique, Jezebel spirit in modern theology. Jezebel's story stands as one of antiquity's most dramatic cautionary tales, her legacy shaped by politics, religion, and enduring cultural symbolism. Jezebel, a comprehensive analysis. Jezebel, also known as Jezebel of Sidon, was a significant figure in the Bible, particularly in the books of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. Her story is one of power, influence, and eventual downfall. This white paper delves into the historical context, her life and actions, her death, and the enduring legacy of Jezebel. Historical context. The Kingdom of Israel. Jezebel lived during the 9th century BCE, a time when the Kingdom of Israel was divided into the Northern Kingdom, Israel, and the Southern Kingdom, Judah. The Northern Kingdom was ruled by the Omride dynasty, to which her husband, King Ahab, belonged. This period was marked by political intrigue, religious syncretism, and conflicts with neighboring kingdoms. Religious background. The religious landscape of ancient Israel was complex. While the official religion was Yahwism, the worship of Yahweh, there was a significant influence from Canaanite and Phoenician religions. Jezebel, being a Phoenician princess, introduced Baal worship into the northern kingdom, which led to a religious crisis and conflict with the prophets of Yahweh. Life of Jezebel. Early life and marriage. Jezebel was the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of the Sidonians. She married King Ahab of Israel, a strategic move that strengthened the political alliance between the two kingdoms. Her marriage to Ahab was arranged to secure trade routes and military support. Religious influence. Jezebel was a devout worshipper of Baal, the chief deity of the Canaanite pantheon. She built a temple to Baal in Samaria and introduced the worship of Ashtoreth, the Canaanite goddess of fertility and war. Her religious zeal led to the persecution of Yahweh's prophets, earning her the enmity of the Israelite religious establishment. Political actions. Jezebel was known for her shrewd political acumen. She manipulated her husband and the court to advance her religious and political agendas. Her actions included the seizure of vineyards and the execution of prophets who opposed Baal worship. She was a formidable figure in the court, often overshadowing her husband in influence and decision-making. Conflict with Elijah. One of the most notable conflicts in Jezebel's life was with the prophet Elijah. Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a contest on Mount Carmel, where he demonstrated the power of Yahweh by calling down fire from heaven. This event led to the execution of the Baal prophets and further intensified the religious tension in the kingdom. Death of Jezebel. Prophecy of Elijah. Elijah prophesied that Jezebel would be eaten by dogs in the field of Jezreel, a grim foretelling of her end. This prophecy was fulfilled when Jezebel was thrown from a window by her eunuchs and her body was trampled and devoured by dogs, leaving only her skull, feet, and palms. Political aftermath. Jezebel's death marked a turning point in the history of the northern kingdom. Her son, Joram, succeeded Ahab, but the dynasty's influence waned. The religious reforms initiated by Jezebel were reversed, and Yahweh worship was re-established as the official religion. Legacy and interpretation. Biblical narrative. In the Bible, Jezebel is portrayed as a villain, a symbol of religious apostasy and political corruption. Her name has become synonymous with evil and wickedness, often used to describe a promiscuous or manipulative woman. Historical significance. Historically, Jezebel's story reflects the religious and political struggles of ancient Israel. Her introduction of Baal worship and the persecution of Yahweh's prophets highlight the tensions between different religious factions and the efforts to maintain religious purity. Cultural impact. Jezebel's legacy extends beyond the Bible. She has been a subject of art, literature, and music, often depicted as a powerful and seductive figure. Her story continues to be a source of inspiration and interpretation in various cultural contexts. Future perspectives. Religious studies. Scholars continue to study Jezebel's role in the religious history of ancient Israel. Her story raises questions about the nature of religious syncretism, the role of women in religious and political life, and the dynamics of power and influence in ancient societies. Feminist interpretations. Feminist scholars have re-examined Jezebel's story, offering alternative interpretations that challenge the traditional portrayal of her as a villain. These interpretations often highlight her agency and power in a patriarchal society and question the biases in the biblical narrative. Cultural relevance. Jezebel's story remains relevant in contemporary discussions about religious freedom, cultural diversity, and the role of women in leadership. Her legacy continues to inspire debates and interpretations that reflect the evolving understanding of her historical and cultural significance. Jezebel's life and death are a testament to the complex interplay of religion, politics, and power in ancient Israel. Her story, while often portrayed as a cautionary tale, offers valuable insights into the religious and cultural dynamics of her time. As scholars and cultural analysts continue to revisit her narrative, Jezebel remains a figure of enduring fascination and debate. Jezebel is one of the most infamous figures in the Bible, primarily portrayed as a queen whose actions have been condemned by the biblical authors. She appears prominently in the books of 1 and 2 Kings in the Hebrew Bible, where she is depicted as a powerful and manipulative figure who defies Israel's monotheistic faith. Historical context. 1. Background of Israel and the divided kingdom. Jezebel lived during a time when the kingdom of Israel was divided into two separate realms, the northern kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom of Judah, 2 tribes. This division followed the death of King Solomon, the third king of Israel. Israel, at the time, was ruled by a series of kings who often led the people into idolatry and disobedience to Yahweh, the God of Israel. Jezebel's story unfolds within this turbulent period, specifically during the reign of her husband, King Ahab of Israel, 874 to 853 BCE. Ahab was the 7th king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and his reign was marked by his marriage to Jezebel, a Phoenician princess, and his pursuit of policies that were in stark contrast to Israel's traditional worship of Yahweh. 2. The rise of Phoenician influence. Jezebel was born in the ancient Phoenician city of Sidon, located in present-day Lebanon. She was the daughter of King Ethbal of Sidon, who was a priest of the pagan god Baal. In marrying Ahab, Jezebel brought with her a deep commitment to the worship of Baal and Asherah, both deities of the Canaanite/Phoenician pantheon. Her marriage to Ahab was not only political but also religious, as it allowed the worship of these deities to infiltrate the northern kingdom of Israel, leading to significant tensions with the prophets of Yahweh. Jezebel's life and role in the Bible. 1. A marriage of power and politics. Jezebel's marriage to Ahab is pivotal in understanding her role in Israelite history. Ahab, although a king, was often portrayed as weak and susceptible to external influence. His marriage to Jezebel was meant to strengthen ties between Israel and Phoenicia, but it led to the introduction of Baal worship and idol worship into Israel. Jezebel's political maneuvering also involved the persecution of the prophets of Yahweh, which set the stage for the legendary showdown between the prophet Elijah and the prophets of Baal. 2. Persecution of prophets and the Reign of Terror. Jezebel's reign in Israel was characterized by her aggressive and often violent support of Baal worship. She is infamously known for her persecution of the prophets of Yahweh. The Bible recounts her efforts to eliminate anyone who opposed her religious reforms, leading to the killing of many of Yahweh's prophets. Elijah versus the prophets of Baal, 1 Kings 18. One of the most dramatic episodes involving Jezebel is the contest between the prophet Elijah and the 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. Elijah challenged the prophets to a divine showdown, in which the true God would answer by fire. Yahweh answered Elijah's prayer, sending fire from heaven to consume his sacrifice, while the prophets of Baal failed to summon any response from their God. Afterward, Elijah ordered the execution of the 450 prophets of Baal. Jezebel, enraged by the loss of her prophets, swore to kill Elijah, prompting him to flee into the wilderness. 3. The death of Naboth, 1 Kings 21. Jezebel's ruthlessness is further seen in the story of Naboth, a Jezreelite who owned a vineyard near the palace of Ahab. When Ahab coveted the vineyard and sought to buy it, Naboth refused to sell it, citing the laws of Israel regarding land inheritance. Jezebel, in a fit of anger, manipulated the situation by arranging for false witnesses to accuse Naboth of blasphemy and treason. Naboth was stoned to death, and Ahab seized the vineyard. This act of injustice was condemned by the prophet Elijah, who foretold doom for both Ahab and Jezebel. Jezebel's death and legacy. 1. The prophecy of her downfall. Elijah, through divine revelation, foretold that Jezebel would meet a grisly end, and this prophecy was fulfilled many years later. After Ahab's death, Jezebel continued to wield influence through her son, Jehoram, who succeeded Ahab as king of Israel. However, her power eventually came to an end with the rise of Jehu, a military commander. Jehu, under the command of God, led a revolt against the house of Ahab. He entered the city of Jezreel, where Jezebel resided. The Bible recounts that Jezebel, now in her later years, painted her face and adorned her hair, trying to maintain some semblance of royal dignity. However, her efforts were in vain. She was thrown from a window by her own servants, and her body was trampled by Jehu's horses. The dogs then ate her body, fulfilling the prophecy made by Elijah that her body would be eaten by dogs, 2 Kings 9:30-37. 2. The symbolism of Jezebel's death. Jezebel's violent and humiliating death symbolized the judgment of God on her sinful ways. Her death was not only the fall of a powerful queen but also the end of a major source of idolatry and apostasy in Israel. The dogs eating her remains further emphasized her complete disgrace. Theological and symbolic significance. 1. Jezebel as a symbol of idolatry and immorality. Throughout history, Jezebel has come to represent not just an individual person, but the embodiment of false religion, idolatry, and immorality. In the New Testament, the name Jezebel is used as a symbol of corrupt, seductive influence. In the book of Revelation, the Jezebel figure appears in a letter to the church in Thyatira, where she is accused of leading Christians into sexual immorality and idolatry, Revelation 2:20-23. 2. Jezebel in Christian and secular traditions. In Christian traditions, Jezebel has been a symbol of temptation and sin, and her name has become synonymous with wickedness and rebellion. She is often invoked to describe people or figures who seduce others into sinful behavior or who act as agents of false religious movements. In secular history and literature, Jezebel has been portrayed in various ways, sometimes as a victim of political forces beyond her control, and at other times as a villainous character. Her name has had a lasting cultural impact, influencing literature, art, and even popular media. Jezebel's enduring legacy. Jezebel remains a powerful and complex figure, not only within the context of the Bible but also in the larger historical and cultural narrative. While her story is one of power, manipulation, and eventual judgment, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of idolatry, immorality, and the corruption of power. The Queen of Baal. Jezebel, the Phoenician princess and queen of Israel, is one of the most infamous figures in biblical history. Her story, as recorded in 1 Kings 16-21 and 2 Kings 9-10, has captivated scholars and theologians for centuries. This white paper aims to provide a comprehensive examination of Jezebel's life, death, and enduring legacy. Historical context. Jezebel was the daughter of Ethbaal, king of Tyre and Sidon, 1 Kings 16:31. Her marriage to Ahab, king of Israel, was a strategic alliance between the two nations. However, Jezebel's influence extended far beyond diplomacy. She brought with her the worship of Baal, a Canaanite deity, which would have far-reaching consequences for Israel. Life and reign. Jezebel's arrival in Israel marked a significant shift in the nation's spiritual trajectory. She actively promoted the worship of Baal, erecting temples and supporting the prophets of Baal, 1 Kings 18:19. Her influence over Ahab led to a period of idolatry and apostasy in Israel, which would ultimately contribute to the nation's downfall. One of the most notable events in Jezebel's story is her confrontation with Elijah, the prophet of God. Elijah, who had prophesied a drought in Israel, challenged the prophets of Baal to a showdown on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18:20-46. The dramatic display of God's power, as fire consumed Elijah's sacrifice, was a decisive victory for the prophet and a humiliation for Jezebel's Baal worship. Despite this setback, Jezebel remained determined to eliminate Elijah and maintain her influence over Ahab. Her actions led to a period of intense persecution for the prophets of God, forcing Elijah to flee for his life, 1 Kings 19:1-3. The Naboth incident. One of the most egregious examples of Jezebel's ruthlessness is the Naboth incident, 1 Kings 21:1-16. When Ahab desired Naboth's vineyard, Jezebel orchestrated a sham trial, resulting in Naboth's execution and the confiscation of his property. This event showcases her cunning, manipulation, and disregard for justice. Death and legacy. Jezebel's demise was as dramatic as her life. After Ahab's death, his son Jehoram ascended to the throne. Jehu, a military commander, was anointed king by the prophet Elisha, and he set out to purge Israel of Ahab's dynasty, 2 Kings 9:1-10. Jehu confronted Jehoram, who was mortally wounded in the ensuing battle. As Jehu approached Jezreel, Jezebel, aware of the impending doom, prepared herself for death. She adorned herself with royal finery and taunted Jehu, calling him a Zimri, 2 Kings 9:30-31, a reference to a previous usurper who had been killed. Jehu, unfazed by her bravado, ordered her eunuchs to throw her out of the window. She was subsequently trampled by horses and devoured by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy, 1 Kings 21:23. Current relevance. Jezebel's legacy extends far beyond ancient history. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of idolatry, manipulation, and the corrupting influence of power. In modern times, the name Jezebel has become synonymous with seduction, manipulation, and wickedness. Future perspectives. As we reflect on Jezebel's story, we are reminded of the enduring themes of power, corruption, and the human condition. Her legacy serves as a warning for leaders and individuals alike, highlighting the importance of accountability, justice, and humility. As we navigate the complexities of our own world, Jezebel's story remains a powerful reminder of the consequences of unchecked ambition and the importance of living a life guided by principles of integrity and compassion. Additional facts. Jezebel's name has become a cultural reference point, symbolizing female power, manipulation, and seduction. Her story has been interpreted in various ways throughout history, with some viewing her as a symbol of resistance against patriarchal societies. Jezebel's worship of Baal and her promotion of idolatry in Israel have been seen as a symbol of the corrupting influence of power and the dangers of syncretism. The Jezebel spirit, a term used in some Christian circles, refers to a perceived influence or attitude that seeks to manipulate and control others, often through seduction or intimidation. Jezebel, a name that has become synonymous with wickedness, manipulation, and idolatry, stands as one of the most infamous women in the Bible. Her story, primarily detailed in the Old Testament books of 1 and 2 Kings, offers a compelling narrative of power, religious conflict, and divine judgment in ancient Israel. Historical context: a Phoenician princess in Israel. Jezebel was a Phoenician princess, the daughter of Ethbal, king of the Sidonians. Her marriage to King Ahab of Israel in the 9th century BCE was a political alliance, a common practice in that era to cement friendly relations between kingdoms. However, this union proved to be a catalyst for significant religious and cultural turmoil within Israel. As a foreigner, Jezebel did not forsake her own religious beliefs upon her marriage. She was a devout worshipper of the Canaanite god Baal and the goddess Asherah. While it was not unusual for foreign wives of Israelite kings to be allowed their own places of worship, Jezebel's devotion went a step further. She actively promoted the worship of her deities throughout Israel, even persuading her husband, King Ahab, to build a temple and an altar for Baal in Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. The story of Jezebel, a reign of idolatry and persecution. Jezebel's influence over her husband and the kingdom was profound. She is depicted as a strong-willed and persuasive figure who wielded considerable power. Her zealous promotion of Baal worship led to a direct clash with the prophets of Yahweh, the God of Israel. The Bible recounts that Jezebel supported hundreds of prophets of Baal and Asherah at her own table while simultaneously persecuting and killing the prophets of the Lord. This religious persecution created deep divisions within the nation. One of the most well-known narratives involving Jezebel is her conflict with the prophet Elijah. After Elijah challenged and defeated 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, Jezebel was enraged and threatened his life, forcing him to flee. Another pivotal and notorious episode is the story of Naboth's vineyard. When King Ahab coveted a vineyard belonging to a man named Naboth, who refused to sell it based on Israelite law, Jezebel took matters into her own hands. She orchestrated a plot to have Naboth falsely accused of blasphemy and treason, leading to his execution. This ruthless act allowed Ahab to seize the vineyard, but it drew the condemnation of Elijah, who prophesied a gruesome end for both Ahab and Jezebel. Jezebel's reign of influence continued for a time even after Ahab's death. However, her demise came as prophesied. Jehu, a military commander anointed by the prophet Elisha to be the new king of Israel, led a revolt. Upon his arrival at Jezreel, Jezebel, adorned in her finery, taunted him from a window. At Jehu's command, her own eunuchs threw her down, where she was trampled by horses and her body was eaten by dogs, fulfilling Elijah's prophecy. Significance and lasting legacy. Jezebel's story serves as a powerful cautionary tale in the Bible about the dangers of idolatry and the consequences of defying God. Her name has become a byword for a wicked, manipulative, and shameless woman. The term Jezebel spirit is sometimes used to describe a person who is controlling and deceptive. Her legacy is one of a foreign queen who actively sought to corrupt the religious purity of Israel, leading the nation away from the worship of Yahweh. She is remembered as the first great instigator of persecution against God's followers in the biblical narrative. Jezebel in other texts. Beyond the books of Kings, Jezebel is mentioned symbolically in the New Testament. In the book of Revelation, the risen Christ warns the church in Thyatira about a woman who calls herself a prophetess and is leading believers astray into sexual immorality and idolatry. This woman is contemptuously referred to as that woman Jezebel. This reference highlights how her name had become an archetype for a corrupting and false teacher. There are also mentions in extra-biblical sources that may refer to Jezebel. The Jewish historian Josephus, as well as other classical sources, provide apocryphal genealogies that name her as the great-aunt of Dido, the legendary queen of Carthage. Some scholars have also drawn parallels between Jezebel's actions and the characteristics of the Canaanite goddess Anat, known for her violent nature. Furthermore, some modern authors have attempted to re-examine her story, suggesting that her villainous reputation was a form of political and religious propaganda written by her enemies. Over time, her name has come to symbolize evil, immorality, and idolatry, especially in Christian and later cultural traditions. Jezebel remains a complex figure, embodying themes of power, idolatry, defiance, and divine justice. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of moral and spiritual corruption and underscores the importance of fidelity to spiritual principles. Whether viewed through the lens of religious symbolism or historical inquiry, Jezebel's legacy continues to provoke thought and reflection on themes of justice, influence, and divine retribution. Jezebel, a name that has become synonymous with wickedness, manipulation, and idolatry, stands as one of the most infamous women in the Bible. Jezebel's story is a complex and multifaceted exploration of power, corruption, and the human condition. As we reflect on her life and legacy, we are reminded of the importance of integrity, justice, and compassion. Her story serves as a warning for leaders and individuals alike, highlighting the dangers of unchecked ambition and